Part 1.
You will hear a conversation between a man and a woman as the woman inquires about schools for her children. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 6. Listen carefully to the conversation and answer questions 1 to 5.
Good morning. Is this the education office for the Wesley area?
That's right. We handle all sorts of inquiries regarding primary and secondary education in and around the Wesley area.
Good. I'm here as I've recently moved into the Wesley area and I want some advice about where I can send my 2 children to school.
That's fine. Let me take down some details onto this form and we can see what we can do for you. Can you give me your family details and details of where you live?
My name is Mrs. Kate Smith. My husband's name is Robert. We have 2 children, both boys. The youngest is called John and he's 8. The eldest is called Simon and he's 14. We live at 9 Webley Avenue, Wesley.
Can you spell Webley, please?
Sure, it's Webley.
And do you have the postcode for that address?
Oh yes, it's WE46YS.
That's fine. Now, I assume, looking at the ages of your children, that you'll be looking at a primary institution for John and a secondary one for Simon. Is that right?
Exactly.
Now, it's the middle of the school year, of course. Will you be wanting your children to go to their new schools right away?
If possible, yes.
Fine. So, what is interesting is that I see on my computer that your address lies on the border of 2 catchment areas.
Catchment areas? What are they?
Each school has a geographic area around it, and if you live within that area, you have the right to attend that school. If you do not live within the catchment area of a particular school, it can be much harder to get your child into that school.
I see.
Now, because you live on the border between 2 catchment areas, you have more choice.
That's good.
Let's look at the primary possibilities for John first. There are 2 institutions that would be available for John. The first is Longmead School and the second is King's School.
Do you have any information about them?
Certainly. Longmead School will be more convenient. From your address, it will take about 15 minutes to walk there. It's a mid-range school with around 150 boys and girls from kindergarten and then year 1 up to year 6. At 8 years old, John should be going into year 4. Is that right?
Yes, he's in year 4 right now.
Now, King's School in the other catchment area is a bit further away. It's not really an easy walk. There is, however, a school bus that picks up children from a stop about 5 minutes walk from where you live, and they would get dropped back there at the end of the school day. You could drive John there yourself, of course, but you know about traffic and school runs, I suppose.
Yes, it can be just terrible.
King's School is bigger, with 200 children, boys and girls, in the same year groups. Both schools have availability, and John will be able to start in either school once the paperwork is done. That should not take long.
Can we visit the schools before deciding?
Of course, I have information packs on both schools, and in them you can find their telephone numbers. You can just call the school and set up a visit. In the packs is also lots of information about various aspects of the schools, including the latest quality inspections, the teaching staff, curriculum and extracurricular activities.
Do you have any recommendations?
Well, I'm not supposed to do that, but my wife and I have both our young girls at King's School, and we are very happy with the standards of teaching there. When we speak to parents who have children at the other schools, we feel that we have made the better choice in that respect.
I suppose that's really more important than how many children there are and how long it takes to get there.
My wife and I think so. Anyway, there's the bus for you and the class sizes are pretty much the same.
Before the conversation continues, you have some time to look at questions 7 to 10. Now listen carefully and answer questions 7 to 10.
So, Shall we look at secondary schools for Simon now?
Yes, please.
Similarly, you have a choice from 2 catchment areas. In the same catchment area as Longmead School, there is Walcott School. It has 800 boys and girls and offers places for children from year 7 to year 13. You said Simon was 14, yes?
That's right.
So, he would go into year 9, I think. Is he in year 9 or 10 right now?
He's nearly old enough to be in year 10, but as he's a bit weak, we've got him in year 9. He's doing well there. What's Walcott School like?
It's got a good reputation. They get good results in exams, and they've had a successful quality inspection last year. The head teacher there is very progressive, and not long ago he introduced a behaviour control programme that has been very successful. It's a very up-and-coming establishment.
And what is the other choice?
It's Wesley Boys' School. It's not got as good results as Walcott School, but they have a good reputation for well-ordered lessons and pupils. It also has very good systems for helping children who are academically not as strong, so that might suit Simon. It's also near King's School, so your children can go together by bus if you decided that that's the way you wanted to go. Wesley Boys, as the name suggests, is only for boys. Some people like that and some don't.
In general, I'm against that. Well, that's quite a lot to think about. Do you have information packs about the secondary schools for me?
I have one for Walcott School, but we've run out of packs for Wesley Boys. Some more arrive tomorrow, so I'll put one in the post immediately. Today's Tuesday, so you will get it on Thursday.
That's great, thank you.
You're welcome. Now, is there anything else?
I will go and visit the 4 schools with the boys and then decide. What should I do when I decide? Do I directly approach the schools?
No. Come back here and I will go through the paperwork with you. It's pretty straightforward. Just bring your family birth certificates for identification and bring some proof of address. Don't forget that or we won't be able to process the application.
I won't forget. Thank you very much and see you soon.
You're welcome. See you soon.
That is the end of part 1. You will now have half a minute to check your answers. Part 2.
You will hear a woman giving a talk to residents at a hotel regarding transport into the local town. First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 15. Now listen carefully to the welcome speech and answer questions 11 to 15.
Good morning. I'm happy to see so many of you have come to listen to me tell you about how to get to and around the town of Westley. I hope you've enjoyed your first breakfast here at the Lenton Hotel and that you're ready to venture out and explore our lovely town. Now, we are around 15 miles out from Westley town centre and we are located just outside the village of Tinton, across the road from the banks of Lake Lenton. The easiest way to get into the town of Westley is to take a bus. If you leave our gates, turn right, and walk for about 200 meters, then you will find the bus stop. It's easy to find as there is a pub right across the road from it called the Red Lion. The bus stop is called Green Fields. The bus takes 40 minutes to reach Westley, and when you get there, you can choose from 5 stops. The first is White Bridge, which is rightly named as it is located near the White Railway Bridge over the River Twine. Get off here if you would like to visit the Westley Museum or the Sports Centre. The next stop is called 5 Ways. This is next to Westley's main shopping mall, which is known as Westgate. The next stop is City Stop, and get off here if you want to wander around the town centre and shop or see our sights, such as the town hall, the old market square, or the memorial fountain. The 4th stop is Main Station. You can access rail services here if you would like to visit any nearby towns. This stop is also near the town cinema. Finally, the bus terminates at the Central Bus Station. Here you can change to any bus that is on the Wesley network, and you can also find nearby the football and rugby clubs, the ice skating rink, and Wesley Library, which is just before the bus station. The cost of getting to any of the Wesley stops is £4 each way, but if you buy a return or Wesley Freedom ticket, the whole cost is half the price of a single fare. The buses run to and from Wesley every 30 minutes, but between 9 p.m. and 7 a.m. the service is hourly.
You now have some time to look at questions 16 to 20. Now listen to the rest of the introductory talk and answer questions 16 to 20.
So now let me tell you about some of the things that are going on right now in Wesley. At the museum, there is a special exhibition of Roman artifacts that have been found in the local area. You may not have known that there is the site of an old Roman town just outside the town of Wesley. In the exhibition, you can see coins, weapons, pots, and jewelry, amongst other ancient treasures. It is one of the best regarded exhibitions of its kind in the country. Normal entry to the museum is £10, but you can get a 50% reduction if you show a voucher from this hotel. These are available for free at the reception. The cinema has a special season of old black and white films on at the moment. Every afternoon this week, there is a choice of 3 black and white films, different ones every day. Tickets are priced at £3. The schedule for the festival can be found at reception. If you want to go to the cinema in the evening, then you will find the usual blockbusters available for £9 a film. The films for this week are on the same schedule as the festival one available at reception. Tomorrow morning is the Wesley Market, which starts at 5 a.m. in the Old Market Square. The market has an enormous variety of things for sale, from local fresh food and arts and crafts to second-hand bargains and antiques. Go and have a browse, or just wander for pleasure and eat at one of the many food stalls. The weather forecast for tomorrow morning is excellent, so you could have a very interesting morning. The market closes at midday, but you might find all the bargains are gone if you arrive too late. Finally, Wesley Town Football Club are playing their semi-final game in the County Cup tomorrow afternoon. You will be guaranteed an amazing atmosphere and an exciting afternoon sport, so sports lovers should not miss this. The game kicks off at 3 p.m. and entry is priced at £5. Go early, as the game will be popular and it will no doubt sell out before the game starts.
That is the end of part 2. You now have half a minute to check your answers. Part 3.
You will hear a university student and her tutor discussing feedback on an extended essay. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 25. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 25.
Good morning, Jane. Thank you for coming in so early this morning.
That's no problem, Dr. Mills. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me to give me the feedback of the first draft of my extended essay on video games and violence.
Oh, that's no problem. I enjoyed reading it. It's an interesting topic. You've made some interesting analysis. So, let's look at my notes. The first thing I wanted to discuss was your essay question. Now, the question you have here is not the question that we agreed upon before you began writing.
That's true. I changed it as my research started pointing me in a different direction.
You should really have consulted me first. The question you have here does not have the focus that it should. I've made some notes on your cover page and on how you should change the question.
Okay, sorry about that.
Don't worry. Students commonly do this. Now, the next thing is your introduction. You do quite a good job here presenting the direction of your essay. There's some spelling that you need to fix, though. This will create a very bad impression on an examiner, so you should look for these errors with great care.
I'll make sure of that. I certainly don't want to create a bad impression on my examiner.
The next part of your essay was on the historical development of video games. Now, this is interesting, but I would doubt the relevance of the amount of specific history that you've included. Your question focuses on video games and violence, so a historical overview is important, but you should just provide this fairly briefly, or you'll use too many words on it.
I think I must have got carried away there. You're right. I did find it interesting.
Now, the next item I'd like to discuss is your use of examples. The first thing is that you lack the right number of examples to prove your points. You only look at 3 or 4, and none of them in a detailed way. You should review briefly at least 6 to 10, and review at least 1 and preferably 2 in real detail in terms of the violence that is present within the game. This will provide your essay with increased credibility.
You're right. I find the whole subject fascinating, but I have little detailed knowledge of any particular video games. I tried reading some reviews of various video games, but the details from those I already included in the essay. I don't really know where I can get more detail on this without buying some games and playing them. Even then, it would take too long to get all the detailed knowledge I need.
It's hard to find detail like this, but I have some suggestions to help you. Blogs are excellent places to find details. First, there are blogs that focus on video games, and there are certain blogs that are focused on violence within video games. If you go through some of these, you'll find plenty of detail from people who play the games. Second, there are consumer watchdog associations that are focused on video game violence. These are filled with reviews of games, but they're solely focused on the violent elements of the games. These two sources will help you get the detail that you need.
You now have some time to look at questions 26 to 30. Now listen to the rest of the discussion and answer questions 26 to 30.
So, moving on. Your discussion of other studies is quite good. You provide a good summary of the studies and surveys on this subject, and you give a good overview of their findings.
Thank you. I thought that part was good too. I spent a lot of time researching and reading into the subject. I found lots of resources online and in the library.
Yes, it's an in vogue subject right now. So you're strong in this section. But what I feel you're missing is some kind of way of comparing the figures that you've found in these different studies. At present, you show the different figures in paragraphs on different studies, but this is a bit confusing. Maybe at the start or the end of this section, you should provide a table where you can present all the relevant statistics next to each other. In that way, the correlation that you identify will be more easily seen.
Okay, I've made a note of that. What next?
Your conclusion. Now, I feel that generally this is fine, but what's missing is that in this type of essay, you need to identify what some of the weaknesses in your argument are. This might be, for example, that some of the surveys and the studies that you used as evidence might be of a limited scope, so that the figures provided might not be of sufficient statistical significance. That's just an example, of course.
That sounds logical. Anything else?
Again, in an essay of this type, You should also identify areas that can be further studied or questions that have arisen from your studies that remain unanswered. At this high level, things like this are expected in the best essays, and so, if you overlook them, this can reflect badly on your essay and reduce its overall grade.
That's great advice, Dr. Mills. I know what you mean. I certainly know the sort of things that should be in my essay with regard to that. So, is that it?
One more thing. I know I've told you to look at lots of different areas, but there's also the issue of your word count. You know the limit is only 5,000 words, and you've exceeded that by 400 exactly in this first draft. It's important that your final draft is on or beneath the limit. Now, it's quite difficult to cut one's word limit down, but the essence of good writing is in the redrafting and editing process. It's normal and advisable to cut your word count down on a second draft by using language more economically. I told you earlier that you were too wordy in your section on the historical development, so that's at least one area where you can cut down on your word usage.
That's fine, Dr. Mills. Of course, I had noticed that I was wordy, but I'm sure that I can sort this out for you by the final draft.
Oh, and don't forget your appendices. Check the extended essay instruction sheet I gave you at the start of the preparation process. The instructions will outline all the documents that will need to be there in your final draft. Make sure that section is complete.
That's fine. Well, thank you, Dr. Mills. I'll go off and get started on all that. I might drop by during the week with some questions if that's all right.
Yes, that's fine. Bye then, Jane.
Bye, Dr. Mills, and thanks again.
That is the end of part 3. You now have half a minute to check your answers. Part 4.
You will hear part of a lecture on environmental issues. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
Thank you all for coming to this talk on environmental issues. Today we are examining the interesting problem of how snakes from India are causing environmental problems in the Everglades of Florida in the southern US. The snakes in question are Burmese pythons. The snakes are native to India and Southeast Asia, but they've established themselves in the wetlands of southern Florida, and one or two have even been spotted in Tennessee, where they're causing havoc with local wildlife. There is even talk of pythons making their way as far as the north of Mexico in the near future, although research has proved this has not yet occurred. Burmese pythons are, as the name might suggest, not local to the US, but they are a popular pet imported to the US from their native habitat in India and Southeast Asia. Sometimes these pets escape from their owners or are simply let go, especially in Florida, a nexus of the imported wildlife trade and one of the few parts of the US with a climate and landscape to which the pythons can easily adapt. That's how hundreds or even thousands of Burmese pythons have managed to establish themselves in the Florida Everglades, the vast protected wetlands in southern Florida, where they've become a persistent challenge for local officials tasked with protecting endangered wildlife. Recent studies have suggested just how big a threat the invasive Burmese pythons have become. Burmese pythons are eating machines. An adult snake can grow to nearly 20 feet, and it can eat anything from raccoons to bobcats to deer to alligators, killing its prey by constriction and then swallowing it whole. In the Florida food chain, the Burmese pythons rest at the top. Experts have shown recently that only birds seem to have escaped their attentions. The same researchers have also recently looked at the distribution of mammals in the Everglades nearly 20 years ago, before Burmese pythons established themselves in the area, and then more recently. They have found a drastic reduction in the number of small mammals that are typically part of a python's diet, and they also discovered that the remaining mammals tend to be most abundant in areas that are either clear of pythons or where the snakes have only recently been spotted. The evidence is strong enough to suggest that invasive Burmese pythons are causing significant wildlife loss in the Everglades. The indications are that the problem could worsen as the snakes continue to grow in size and numbers. As a result of complaints by local farmers whose livestock has been affected and by local trappers who are now controlled by stricter legislation, research has now been undertaken. One method that researchers have used to measure the effect that pythons have had on indigenous species is to look at detailed nighttime roadkill surveys of the Everglades between 5 years ago and today, and compare that data with similar roadkill surveys taken between the same year period before that, and again the same year period before that. The researchers found that there was a 99.3% decrease in the frequency of raccoon observations, and 98.9% decrease in the frequency of opossum observations, and 87.5% decrease in the frequency of bobcat observations, and a total failure to detect any previously widespread rabbits. Since all of these animals can serve as a python's dinner, and given the fact that the mammals were more common in areas where the pythons hadn't been seen, it's reasonable to infer that the Burmese pythons are affecting the ecology of the Everglades. While the snakes have been spotted in the Everglades for at least the past 2 decades, they were only recognized as fully established 12 years ago. Wildlife officials have tried to remove the snakes, and 400 were taken out 3 years ago. However, the damage may already be done. Right now, the only hope to halt further python invasion into new areas is swift, decisive, and deliberate human action. The trouble is that it's much easier to prevent invasive species from establishing themselves in a new territory than it is to root them out once they've gotten comfortable. The US government recently banned the import and interstate commerce of Burmese pythons and a few other foreign snakes. But, under pressure from the pet industry, other snakes, including the boa constrictor, are still allowed to be imported into the US. The wildlife trade is big business, and importers will resist any new rules. Reptiles alone are worth more than $50 million, and according to the American Pet Products Manufacturers Association, some 11 million reptiles were kept as pets as recently as 2005. Not everyone agrees with the researchers' findings, though. The US Association of Reptile Keepers, a trade group, told journalists that the Burmese python study's authors had jumped to conclusions, and that other work had shown that mercury pollution in the water might be playing a major role in the deaths of small mammals. This may or may not be true, but in any case, invasive species pose a major threat to the US. Another example is the Illinois River problem with invasive Asian carp, which costs the US some $120 million a year. And the python problem may not stay localized to the Everglades. These pythons do not stand still, and the US Fish and Wildlife Service reports that they're adapting to colder climates and may be expanding their range. We need to watch out as, after all, humans are small mammals too.
That is the end of part 4. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
That is the end of the listening test. You now have 10 minutes to transfer your answers to the listening answer sheet.